December 8th, 1980, New York City. It's just after 10:50 at night, and John Lennon is walking toward the entrance of the Dakota Building, the Gothic, fortress-like apartment complex on the Upper West Side that he called home. He's coming back from a recording session. He's happy. He just told an interviewer that very afternoon that he felt reborn, that the darkness was finally behind him, that he was ready to live again. And then 4 bullets changed everything. But here's what most people don't know. The story of that night didn't start when Mark Chapman pulled the trigger. It started almost 24 hours earlier with a day so full of hope, so full of small, intimate human moments that makes what happened at the end almost impossible to process. I'm going to take you through those final 24 hours, every detail, because John Lennon deserves more than a headline. He deserves the full story. If this kind of deep dive into rock history is what you're here for, hit that like button right now and subscribe. We do this every week, and you don't want to miss what's coming next. Let's go back to the beginning. December 8th, 1980. But first, you need to understand where John Lennon was in his life at that exact moment, because it makes everything that follows hit even harder. For 5 years, between 1975 and 1980, John Lennon had essentially vanished from public life. After decades of being one of the most famous human beings on the planet, a Beatle, a peace activist, a cultural icon, he stepped back completely. He became what he called a house husband. He baked bread, he raised his son Sean, he barely touched a guitar. The man who wrote Imagine spent half a decade just trying to be a normal father, and by most accounts, those were some of the happiest years of his life. But by late 1980, something had shifted. He was ready to come back. He and Yoko had just released Double Fantasy, an album that felt deeply personal, a love letter to his marriage, to his son, to the life he'd rebuilt, and the world was responding. The reviews were mixed at first, but the fans were hungry. John Lennon was back, and he felt it. So on the morning of December 8th, 1980, John Lennon woke up in his apartment at the Dakota and stepped into what should have been an ordinary day. He had breakfast with Yoko, he spent time with 5-year-old Sean, and then around noon, a photographer named Annie Leibovitz arrived to shoot photos for Rolling Stone magazine. The images from that session became legendary. John curled around Yoko in a fetal position, naked, vulnerable, completely exposed. When Leibovitz showed the Polaroid to Yoko and asked if she liked it, John looked at the image and said something that would become heartbreaking in retrospect. He said, "This is our relationship," just like that. Simple, true, perfect. Later that afternoon, a television crew arrived for a taped interview. And John Lennon, sitting in his living room at the Dakota, said something remarkable. He said he felt like he was starting over, that Double Fantasy was just the beginning, that he had so much more to give. He talked about the future, about more music, about growing old with Yoko, about watching Sean grow up. He wasn't performing for the camera. Anyone who's seen that footage can tell you he meant every word. There was a lightness to him that hadn't been there in years. And this is where the story takes its first dark turn, though no one knew it yet. Because downstairs on the sidewalk in front of the Dakota, a 25-year-old man from Hawaii had been standing and waiting for most of the day. His name was Mark David Chapman, and he had a copy of Double Fantasy tucked under his arm. Chapman had been in New York for a few days already. He'd actually been at the Dakota once before, a week earlier, but had gone home to Hawaii. Something brought him back. On December 8th, he took up his position outside the building and waited. And in the early afternoon, John Lennon walked out, right past him. And Chapman, this man who had traveled thousands of miles with murder in his heart, asked Lennon to sign his copy of Double Fantasy. John Lennon stopped. He signed the record. He looked at Chapman and said, "Is that all you want?" Chapman nodded. The photographer who was there captured the moment. Lennon getting into his car, heading to the recording studio, Chapman staring after him. And instead of leaving, instead of taking that signed album and walking away, Chapman stayed. At the recording studio that evening, John and Yoko worked with producer Jack Douglas on a track for Yoko's upcoming album. The session went well. Lennon was energized, creative, and in a good mood. Around 10:30 in the evening, they decided to wrap up and head home. A producer suggested they stop for dinner first. John said no. He wanted to get home. He wanted to see Sean before the boy went to sleep. That decision, that small, fatherly, completely human decision to skip dinner and go home, it haunts everyone who knows the story. Their car pulled up to the Dakota at approximately 10:49 p.m. John and Yoko got out and walked toward the entrance, and that's when it happened. Chapman stepped out of the shadows and called Lennon's name. John turned, and Chapman fired 5 shots from a .38 revolver. 4 of them hit Lennon in the back and shoulder. John Lennon stumbled forward through the entrance of the Dakota, made it to the security desk, and said, and these were nearly his last coherent words, "I'm shot." He collapsed. The doorman called 911. Yoko screamed. Within minutes, police arrived and rushed Lennon to Roosevelt Hospital in a patrol car, not waiting for an ambulance. They drove through red lights with John bleeding in the back seat. Surgeons worked on him for over an hour, but the damage was catastrophic. At 11:07 p.m. on December 8, 1980, John Lennon was pronounced dead. He was 40 years old. Meanwhile, Mark David Chapman was still standing on the sidewalk outside the Dakota when police arrived. He hadn't run. He was sitting on the curb reading The Catcher in the Rye, a novel he would later claim held some kind of significance for him. He offered no resistance. He was arrested without incident. The news broke just after midnight. Howard Cosell announced it on Monday Night Football. Millions of Americans heard it during a game. Outside the Dakota, within hours, thousands of people gathered in complete silence or singing or weeping. The grief was immediate and total and global. In Liverpool, in Tokyo, in every city where rock and roll had ever meant anything to anyone. Yoko Ono released a statement the next day that was just 2 sentences long. She asked fans not to hold a funeral or a memorial. She said, "John loved and prayed for the human race. Please pray the same for him." What makes those final 24 hours so unbearable to sit with is the clarity of them. This wasn't a rock star burning out. This wasn't addiction or recklessness or the chaos that often surrounds famous lives. John Lennon was doing everything right. He was present. He was creating. He was going home to his son. He signed an autograph for the man who would kill him and went about his day. There was no warning, no darkness gathering on the horizon, just an ordinary day in a life that was finally beginning to bloom again. The world lost more than a musician that night. It lost whatever John Lennon was going to become. The albums he hadn't written, the version of himself he'd worked so hard to find, the father Sean would have had. Double Fantasy, the album he'd been so proud of, went to #1 around the world in the weeks that followed. He finally had his comeback. It just arrived too late for him to see it. 44 years later, the Dakota Building still stands on the corner of 72nd Street and Central Park West. People still leave flowers there. Across the street in Central Park, there's a small memorial called Strawberry Fields with a mosaic that says one word, imagine. Every single day, someone comes to stand there and remember, because some stories don't fade. Some losses stay raw no matter how much time passes. And John Lennon's last day on Earth, full of love, full of hope, full of the cruel randomness of the world, is one of them. If this video moved you or taught you something you didn't know, please leave a like. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who care about these stories. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. And if you want to keep going, check out the video on screen right now. Another story from rock history that's just as powerful, just as human, and just as unforgettable. Thank you for being here. These stories deserve to be told, and you deserve to hear them.